friends, it's Kendra from Peace Fabric Co. here, and you are here for week 3's tutorial on the extra scrappy Silk Stars quilt. Now, I just want to make some clarifications. This is the tutorial only for the extra scrappy Silk Stars quilt. If you are not doing the extra scrappy, please don't pay attention to these because it is different than the pattern. And this version is only available as part of the Quilt-along, but the other versions are available all the time. And so you can read the pattern and you'll get the complete instructions. The deal is with the extra scrappy quilt, that version, which is not part of the pattern, we've cut our pieces a little bit differently than what the pattern calls for, and assembly of the blocks is going to be a little different. So today we're working on the half square triangles. So we're going to move on to that. The previous videos have been for choosing the fabric and also cutting the fabric. So if you are not at the sewing the half square triangles together yet for the extra scrappy Silk Stars quilt, go back to my blog, watch those. Got it? All right, so if you remember from last week, after we finished cutting out the pieces for the extra scrappy Silk Stars quilt, I had you stack them in these little sets. It was 2 of the background squares and then the matched pairs of 4 colors. So in this one here, you see I have my 2 background squares, and then I have 2 of the same greens, 2 of the same bold pink, 2 of the bright blue, and 2 of a medium pink. So I'm gonna take this here. Now your squares are going to be different size than mine. I've already made 2 extra scrappy Silk Star quilts. So this time I decided to just make a miniature version, and it's going to be a little throw pillow. So don't panic if your squares are much larger than mine. They should be. The most common size is 4.5 inch for the throw size. But you just follow the chart that was in last week's blog post and the tutorial in there, because that's the size you need. So now I have this little pack here, and I'm going to be using them. I'm going to be sewing them together in half square triangles. We're going to be doing the 2 at a time method. Now that's why some of you have sent me messages asking, why did we cut our squares smaller than what is called for in the pattern? Are we ending up with a smaller quilt? Nope, we are not ending up with a smaller quilt. We are just using 2 at a time half square triangles instead of 4 at a time or 8 at a time like in the pattern. So now that I have 2 background squares and matched pairs of these 4 colors, I'm ready to start. So I am going to take, working down from the top this way, I am going to take a background square, excuse me, and one of the colors. I'm going to match them up. Now I use this washi tape right here instead of marking a line on each of my triangles. If you're familiar with 2 at a time half square triangles, typically you would draw a line from corner to corner and then you would sew a 1/4 inch from either line. But with this tape here, what I can do is I can line up my, I know that this foot gives me about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just lining it up with the edge, and then this tape here, if I keep this corner, I'll move my hand, if I keep this corner on this line here all the way up, I'm gonna have a nice 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way through. So that's why I use this, because it's just so slow. Usually I start with a leader or ender, and I didn't right there. So bad Kendra. So I'm gonna sew that together, just like that, and I'm gonna chain piece. So now I am going to grab this and this. So first I grabbed a background and color 1, let's call it, for this block. Now I'm grabbing color 1 and color 2. And do you ever notice how when you're recording or when somebody's watching you, it just always goes, it's always a little more difficult? So I'm just chain piecing right onto this one here. Now I'm grabbing this and color 3 keeping the corner on that line so that I get a nice 1/4 inch seam down either side of the center point of the half square triangle. And I'm gonna flip this little chain piece around here in a second and quilt the other, sew the other side, piece the other side. Okay, now I'm left with color 4 and a background square. So now these two get sewn together. All right, so we're done that. I'm going to take this little chain that I made and turn it around and just super fast shoot through the other side of that center point line. All right, there we go. So this is the chain that I am left with. I am gonna grab my snips. So this is the little stack I'm left with now, and it starts with a background square stitched to a color, and then that color stitched to the next color, next color, next color, and that last color stitch back to a background square. Now you're made 2 at a time half square triangles, so each of these will make 2 half square triangles, so you'll have 2 half square triangles that are the background and this piece. So I'm gonna cut these up and show you what to do next, although I feel like I may be giving you next week's task already, but I just want to show you what we're going to achieve because I think that will help you understand why we're doing this. So if you feel like you know it already, you just go ahead and take all of these sets that you made, these sets here last week, and sew them all together in the way I just showed you while looking at the machine. All right, so here I am with my little stack of half square triangles, 2 at a time, and I am just going to cut them in half. And instead of using my big long ruler, I just grabbed a little straight edge that I have. It's from my Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers, but it works well. I'm going to use these later to square up and perfect my half square triangles, because you can see they're not perfect right now. If I cut this in half and opened this one up, you can see, you can just tell it would not be perfect. But that is why I trim every single one of my half square triangles, because I might not be a perfectionist while sewing those 2 lines, but I strongly believe that my half square triangles do need to be perfectly cut. There we go. They are all cut into individual half square triangles. All right, so now that we have them all cut apart, I am going to trim my half square triangles. Now, some of you may have a special ruler like the Clearly Perfect half square triangle ruler, or sorry, the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer ruler. Some of you may have the block lock ruler. Some of you may have something where you press them open first and then square them up. This is my way that I love to do it. I like only having to trim 2 sides instead of all 4 sides. With the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, I decide how big I'm making my half square triangles. In this case, I'm making them 1.5 inches. That is not the size that any of the rest of you are making them, so please don't pay attention to that. You are making them likely 4.5 inch size for the throw, or other sizes according to the chart. So, but if you have this ruler, the dotted line is where you line up your seam. And some of you may remember that in other tutorials I've done, I've kept the paper on the back. I actually prefer that. It doesn't slip as much. So with this Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you trim off the edges, trim the dog ears, And there you go. There is my half square triangle all trimmed up. So I'm going to go through this stack of half square triangles. So what I would do if it weren't for the tutorial is I would sew all of the half square triangles together 2 at a time. Then I would bring them over here, having kept them separated in their sets. I would trim them, or sorry, I would cut them all in half like this, keeping them in their sets. I would trim them, keeping them in their sets. And then I would move on to the next step, which I'm about to show you. All right, so here I am over at the ironing board. I have my little stack of trimmed half square triangles. I have 2 of each, see that? 2 of each set, well, 2 of each pair, background and light pink, and that is what you should have. So usually I'd be coming over here with a whole stack of them, all of the sets trimmed and ready to go, but I don't because this is a tutorial, so I am just doing 1 set at a time. I am a press open person, so that's what I'm gonna do. I am not using steam. It looks like my iron was not all the way hot for this one. I'm not using steam because I don't want to have the bias edge stretch, although with 2 at a time it isn't quite as much of a worry, but I still just want to protect my cute little half square triangles. I want to keep them nice and square since I already did the work to square them up before opening them. Okay, true confession here. I have used steam in the past for this, and I don't actually struggle that much with them stretching when it's 2 at a time, or maybe I'll use flatter or something like that. So there is no judgment coming from me if you are a steam user or flatter user. Just over there off the screen where you can see is my bottle of flatter that I would use. Pineapple scent, it's really lovely. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly finish pressing these and be right back. All right, so now you have your half square triangles pressed open for this one little set. Now this is actually as far as you need to take it this week. So this week you need to sew your 2 at a time half square triangles, cut them apart, trim them, and press them open. You can just leave it here, but I wanna show you what we're gonna be doing the following week, just so you understand where we're going with this. So if you remember from last week, the cutting week, I had you cut the H2 squares to the vintage cutting requirements, and it was only H2 according to the cutting requirements chart, and then the background squares that went with this according to the little chart that was in the blog. So you're going to grab your H2 squares. I'm going to grab one for now, and I'm going to grab one of each of these little squares here, and I am going to line them up. I grabbed the wrong one. Line them up around this. Oh, I keep grabbing the wrong one. There we go. And there we go. Now this H2 square looks a little tiny for this spot, but that's only because the seam allowances are going to get eaten up here and tighten it up. So if you can conceptualize this, this is a quarter of the star. Oops, sorry, I bumped you there. Are you okay? I hope you're fine. See, look at Christine's diagram. If you look here, we have a quarter of a star. So from each set, you are going to end up with 2 quarters of the star. Just like that. Now, once we get to sewing these quarters together, I wouldn't use both of these in the same star. I would mix them up for the extra scrappy look, but this is how you're going to get it. You see that, right? You see a quarter star there? I am absolutely going to cover that next week in the tutorial, that quarter of the star, and sewing those half square triangles together. So don't worry about that. I just wanted you to have a little visual for what we're working towards. So to recap one more time, this week's task, week 3 for the Silk Stars Quilt-along, you are going to take those sets that you made at the end of the cutting week and you're going to sew them together, keeping them in their sets. One square to the next square to the next square. Watch the video again if you need to. You're going to cut the half square triangles apart into two. You're going to trim them and you're going to press them open. This whole time you're going to keep them in their sets, keep them grouped in their individual set. Otherwise you're going to be sorting it out later and you really don't want that. Then set it aside for next week with your H2 pieces, and we will move on to quarter stars next week. That's all. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, rest of your week, wherever you're at. See ya.